I remember this last summer. I was at Kathy and Larry Smith's home while their sons and grandchildren were visiting. And the Smiths have this lovely pond in the back of their yard. So there we were, the children with fishing rods, and I trying to be part of it and trying to put bait on their hooks. So then they threw in their bait and the line, fishing line, and then they waited and waited. And yes, actually they caught fish. It was really exciting. And then we had a great time together and did the burgers and had a wonderful time. But what got me thinking about what are qualities that people who fish need in order to function as fishers? Male, female, doesn't really matter the gender, but fishing itself. What were the qualities of these disciples of Jesus, whom he called, that they could put to good use for the work of the kingdom, or in following Jesus and in sharing Jesus' message? So when Jesus said, "Follow me," what qualities did they bring with them? Well, when I think about my years of going fishing as a kid, always took a lot of patience, just throwing it in and waiting. So I think patience, being patient, is one of those qualities. Second thing is persistence. It's kind of, if you give up really quickly, won't get any fish. So it takes time, it takes persistence, it takes patience, and also it takes paying attention, because you have to look at that bobber, because if a fish bites or nibbles at the hook, you gotta be ready to pull that hook out and hook the fish and get it out. So, dealing with rough situations and dealing with messy and stinky situations, I think, that's what these first disciples of Jesus were used to. And they were embodying some of those qualities. And some may have described them as rough, just as you would watch the TV, The Biggest Catch or The Most Dangerous Catch. So I imagine they have been through some rough times, especially as the Bible also describes those storms that they faced on the Sea of Galilee and where they were afraid to drown. So what about Jesus' call when he calls them, "Come and follow me"? Jesus calls them to what? Jesus calls them to what the scriptures calls the way. It's not a one-time thing. It's a way of life. And in the Bible, actually in the Acts of the Apostles, the first Christians were not called Christians. The way they lived, they were called the way, because there was a better way, there was a good way of living, a way of life and a way of love that Jesus embodied. So Jesus inviting them to follow him was basically, journey with me. You will learn from me. You will understand, and in a relationship with Jesus, that's what I imagine the disciples, how they learned, just like apprentices. And when I think of how I learned how to fix a bicycle, for example, I watched my dad closely growing up, how did it, and looking at it, and then trying it myself, and under guidance from him. That's how we learn, don't we? Hands-on learning. And the way of Jesus, what is this way of Jesus? To what are we called and invited to? Well, when we think of the way of love, and that every one of us embodies the love of God, every one of us is the face of God. Just as the statement goes, when you meet a person or when you see a person, imagine that person being Jesus in human disguise, especially when it's a person you may not like or a person that may make you feel uncomfortable or not at ease. So think of it. You're meeting Jesus in person, in every person. That's the message. God embodied every human being created by God in the image of God, reflecting the presence of God. Yeah, that's going deep, doesn't it? So, to what is God calling you? The disciples were called to follow Jesus in the way of Jesus, and we are called to do the same. And baptism, actually, is our calling. You remember, a couple of Sundays ago, we remembered Jesus' baptism and our baptisms. And that is Jesus' call when he hears God's voice, "You are my beloved, I love you, you are precious to me." That is the call when you know you're God's beloved. You can trust God to guide you. You hand your life over to Jesus. You know you belong to Jesus, and Jesus walks with you everywhere. Out of that love that Jesus experienced fully and heaven open with the Spirit descending on him, out of that love follows his calling to share that love. I had this interesting dream recently. I was standing on a platform that looked like an open great bridge, and I had a broom and a hose to clean it off. And I thought, there is something to being on a bridge and to be a bridge builder. So what if Jesus is calling you to be a bridge builder? Jesus invites us, and these are the first words of Jesus' message, and the first words actually of John the Baptist's message. Turn around. Turn around from your way. Because often I notice in myself, I'm mindless, I just keep going through the motions, going in in a routine, and being caught up in my own little world. So when Jesus says turn around, it's almost like stop for a while, pay attention, and notice there is a greater world. There is meaning and purpose for you. There is a deeper level of connection and relationship with Jesus that can carry you and that can provide meaning for you. Now, everyone in the Bible who has been called has been frustrated about their call and has been suffering and had to pay a big price for it. Remember Jonah. God is calling him, go to Nineveh and tell them to turn around, to turn to God. Well, Jonah didn't like that so much, so he ran from God, got on a ship, did sail away, and, well, it caught up with him. So whether he wanted or not, he had to turn around, and he went back to Nineveh, as God had called him. And you hear over and over stories of people who feel like there is a tug, there is a calling, but they didn't trust that. And sometimes people around them notice that. Think of Jeremiah, the prophet who is being called weeping prophet, because his heart is breaking over Jerusalem, the people who do not follow God, the people who are deported to Babylon, the people whose lives have been destroyed and who are grieving deeply, and he's hurting with his people. So no easy lot to be called to follow Jesus. And think of Mary, Jesus' mother, as being called. Angel Gabriel telling her, you're God's favorite one. Here you hear the voice again. You're God's beloved. And you will carry Jesus in your womb. You will give birth to God incarnate. And it will break your heart seeing your own baby crucified. One of my favorite sculptures, the Michelangelo sculpture of the Pietà, where Mary is holding the body of Jesus who has just been taken down from the cross. And you see her. So, to what is God calling you? I've gotten into watching the news, especially what's going on in Minneapolis. And it touched me deeply. And I'm thinking especially of the people who have been hurt, and right now, the people who have been shot to death. To what is God calling us in that situation? It's got to stop the brutality. Where and how can you work for justice and peace, for fairness? We have that great prophet of our nation who, from the Birmingham jail, writes to all of us that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So what's taking place in Minneapolis right now is a threat to our all justice and fairness. All of us are implicated. Or the other great prophet, John Lewis, who said, yes, there is good trouble that you can get into when you're speaking up for what is right, when you're standing up, when you protest peacefully, when you say that is not right. We can do better as a nation. We can do better as law enforcement officers. We can do better. I love the story that I read about ICE setting up in the back parking lot of a Lutheran church in Minneapolis. And they were not aware that there was like a prayer shawl group meeting inside. They were knitting. And one of the ladies came out and noticed what's going on. And she asked, well, why don't you set up in the front parking lot where everyone can see you? Be out in the front. Well, they took off and didn't return. To what is God calling you?